My daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, we need your house for the children." She didn't ask, she declared it, as if my life here, 40 years of mornings with chamomile tea on this very porch, 40 years of Christmas roasts and burnt pecan pies, was already finished. I was 66, not buried. But in that moment, the way she folded her arms and tilted her head, I understood something cold and metallic. She wasn't planning around me, she was planning past me. She stood in my kitchen while sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, lighting the dust that floated above my old oak table. Tessa always did that thing with her jaw when she believed she was being reasonable. "It just makes sense," she continued. "The kids need stability, more space. You don't even use half the rooms anyway." I looked at her carefully. I've learned something in 66 years. People reveal themselves in the spaces between their sentences, and in those spaces I saw impatience, calculation, ownership. "This is my house," I said quietly. "Of course it is," she replied too quickly, "but we're family." Family. That word suddenly felt heavier than my cast-iron skillet. She started walking through the house while we spoke, touching the banister, glancing into the dining room as if she were already measuring the square footage. Brent, her husband, followed her in silence, hands in his pockets, pretending not to inspect the walls. He paused near the hallway closet where I keep my paperwork. "I noticed you've got 3 bedrooms upstairs," Tessa continued. "The kids could each have one, we could convert the den. You could stay in the downstairs guest room. It would be easier for you anyway, less stairs." Easier for me. I still climb those stairs every night without holding the railing. I walked to the stove and turned down the simmering pot of lentil stew. The smell of thyme and bay leaf filled the kitchen. I needed that familiar scent to steady myself, because something in my own house was shifting, and I could feel it like a draft under a closed door. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. She exchanged a quick, practiced look with Brent. "Just sign something simple," she said. "We'd transfer the house into our names for legal reasons. It's just paperwork. You'd still live here." Just paperwork. At 66, I know the difference between paper and power. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the porcelain sugar bowl my late husband bought in Krakow during a business trip in 1989. It has a tiny crack along the rim, imperfect, but still whole. I ran my thumb along that crack. Brent cleared his throat. "We're only thinking about the future." The future. Interesting how the future never seemed to include my voice. Tessa stepped closer. "Mom, you're not getting any younger." There it was. Not concern, not love, strategy. The house suddenly felt smaller, like the walls themselves had leaned inward. I could see it clearly now, the spare bedroom mentally repainted, my study turned into a nursery, my cedar chest shoved into some corner because it didn't match their decor. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I remembered the night she had a fever at 7, and I sat on the bathroom floor beside her until dawn. I remembered sewing her Halloween costumes by hand because money was tight. I remembered skipping new shoes so she could go on that school trip. And now she was measuring my hallway with her eyes. "I'll think about it," I said. Her smile tightened. "We don't have a lot of time." That sentence told me everything. Because when someone says you don't have a lot of time, what they really mean is, "I've already decided." They stayed for dinner. Brent complimented the stew too loudly. Tessa talked about school districts and mortgage rates as if I had already agreed. The children ran upstairs without asking, slamming doors that were never theirs. After they left, I walked slowly through every room. I touched the banister, the fireplace mantel, the old bookshelf that still smells faintly of lemon oil. When I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, something settled inside me. Not fear, clarity. If my daughter believed I was already fading, already confused, already preparing to hand over the keys, she was very wrong. Because at 66, I might move a little slower in the mornings, but I still know how to make decisions, and I was about to make one she would never see coming. Hello, my dear friends. I'm Grace, and let me tell you something important. No one gets to erase you while you're still alive. If your own family starts planning your life without you, something is deeply wrong. Tell me in the comments below, what would you do in Martha's place? The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, just as I always do. Habit is a stubborn companion. I brewed coffee in my old Italian moka pot, the one that whistles like it's complaining about the hour, and I sat by the kitchen window. The maple tree in the yard was shedding early leaves. For the first time in years, I wondered what this house looked like to someone who didn't love it. To Tessa, it was square footage. To Brent, it was leverage. By noon, they were back. No call, no warning, just the crunch of tires on gravel and car doors slamming with purpose. I didn't rush to greet them. Tessa walked in carrying a measuring tape. Brent followed with a tablet in his hand. The children darted past me again, racing upstairs as if they already owned the place. "We were in the neighborhood," she said brightly. "You don't bring a measuring tape when you're just in the neighborhood." Brent crouched near the entryway and began measuring the hallway. "Just seeing if the sectional would fit," he muttered. "The sectional?" I asked. "The one we'd bring," Tessa clarified while slowly turning in the living room. "This couch is a little dated." Dated? That couch held my husband's final nap before the hospital. I watched them move through my home like surveyors mapping land for development. Brent snapped a photo of the staircase. Tessa opened the linen closet without asking. She even rattled the handle of my study. "Mom," she called, "why is this door locked?" "Because I locked it," I replied evenly. She laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was testing. At one point, I stepped into the hallway just in time to see Brent standing far too close to the small cabinet where I keep my documents. The drawer was slightly ajar. "Looking for something?" I asked. He straightened immediately. "Just admiring the craftsmanship." "That cabinet isn't craftsmanship. It's plain pine from a hardware store 20 years ago." They stayed for hours. Tessa spoke as if arrangements were already confirmed. "We'd repaint this room. Soft sage for Lily, maybe navy for Ethan. Kids need personality." Kids need personality. Apparently, grandmothers need relocation. At one point, she leaned beside me at the kitchen island. "You know, this would actually take stress off you," she said quietly. "Managing a property like this alone? At your age?" I turned slowly towards her. "At my age?" She sighed. "Mom, don't be sensitive." Sensitive, that word landed differently than the others. It wasn't about space anymore. It was about competence, about rewriting the story. Because if I became sensitive, then maybe I could become confused. And if I became confused, paperwork becomes much easier. By late afternoon, they had mentally redesigned half the house. Brent even suggested knocking out part of the dining room wall. I imagined drywall dust floating over my late husband's framed war medals. "No," I said sharply. They both froze. "What?" Tessa asked. "No walls are being knocked down." She gave Brent a look, the kind couples exchange when they believe someone is being irrational. The children came running downstairs, arguing about which bedroom had better light. "Mom said this one will be mine," Lily shouted. Will be. Not might. Not maybe. Will be. Something settled deeper inside me then. Not anger. Strategy. After they finally left, I walked upstairs. Beds were rumpled, my quilt dragged halfway off. A closet door stood open. It was subtle, but it was occupation. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out a notebook. I wrote the date, the time they arrived, the measuring tape, the photographs, the comments about my age, the mention of paperwork, the children being told the rooms would be theirs. I wrote everything. Then I opened my study. Inside the small metal lockbox were the things that mattered: the deed, insurance papers, bank statements, copies of everything important. Still there, for now. Tessa's cheeks flushed. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said quietly, "you're trying to reposition me." The word landed. Reposition. Because that's what this was. Not concern, not love. Logistics. For the first time since this started, I saw frustration crack her composure. "You're being paranoid," she snapped. Interesting. When a woman protects her autonomy, she becomes paranoid. When others circle her assets, they are practical. Brent stepped in. No one is circling anything. But he didn't deny the paperwork. He didn't deny the realtor. He didn't deny measuring my hallway. They left abruptly that evening. No stew, no polite small talk. As their car disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch longer than necessary. The sky was turning that peculiar shade of lavender just before dusk. I inhaled slowly. Something had shifted. The mask had slipped. They were no longer pretending this was a gentle suggestion, and I was no longer pretending I didn't see the strategy. If they wanted to escalate, I would be ready. The isolation began so quietly I almost admired the precision. That Saturday, I was supposed to go to my book club. We meet once a month, 6 women between 60 and 78, rotating houses, drinking strong coffee and arguing about novels like it's a competitive sport. This month, it was my turn to host. At 10 in the morning, I called Tessa. She had promised earlier in the week to pick up lemon tarts from a bakery downtown, the ones dusted with powdered sugar and just a hint of cardamom. She didn't answer. At 11, still nothing. At noon, my guests started arriving. No tarts, no Tessa, no explanation. I texted her. "Sorry, Mom, totally forgot. Things are hectic." Forgot. Tessa never forgets anything that benefits her. We managed without dessert. Clara brought biscotti. Naomi arrived with figs from her garden. But I noticed something else. 2 of them asked gently if I was doing all right. They said Tessa had mentioned I'd been a bit overwhelmed lately. Overwhelmed. I smiled. I'm perfectly fine. But the seed had been planted. Later that afternoon, I checked my voicemail. One message. From a clinic confirming an appointment I had never scheduled. When I called back, the receptionist sounded confused. "Your daughter booked a general cognitive assessment for you. Just routine." Routine? No one schedules a cognitive assessment for a healthy 66-year-old without a reason. Unless the reason is documentation. That evening, Tessa came by alone. No tape measure, no Brent, just her. She walked into the kitchen and sat down heavily. "You embarrassed me today." By hosting my book club? By acting like everything is fine when it's not. I leaned against the counter. What exactly isn't fine? She exhaled dramatically. "Mom, people are starting to notice." "Notice what?" "That you forget things, that you get defensive." I stared at her. "I didn't forget anything," I said slowly. "You forgot the appointment. The one I didn't schedule." She hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. "I was trying to help," she insisted. "If we get ahead of this now, it'll be easier later." "Ahead of what?" I asked. "Decline or control?" Then she said something that shifted the air entirely. "Brent has a friend who's a doctor. He can evaluate you, just to make sure you're still legally sound." Legally sound. The phrasing was surgical. My chest tightened. Not with fear, with clarity so sharp it almost hurt. They weren't just planning to move into my house. They were building a case. I walked to the pantry and took down a jar of apricot preserves I made last summer. I needed something ordinary in my hands, something sweet. "I am not seeing any doctor you arrange," I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you resisting everything?" "Because resistance is the only thing standing between me and erasure." "I'm not resisting," I replied. "I'm declining." She stood up abruptly. "You're being stubborn." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being cautious." She shook her head. "You don't even realize how hard you're making this." That sentence lingered. Making what hard? The transition? The transfer? The takeover? After she left, I sat at the kitchen table long after sunset. The house felt different now. Not physically invaded, strategically invaded. Conversations were happening about me without me. Narratives were forming. Overwhelmed, forgetful, defensive. If repeated often enough, those words could turn into paperwork, and paperwork, once signed, becomes permanence. I stood up and walked into my study. I opened my notebook and added new entries. Book club comment about being overwhelmed. Unauthorized medical appointment scheduled. Mention of doctor friend. Phrase used, legally sound. I underlined that last one twice. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing so soon. I took out my laptop. Not to argue, not to research assisted living, but to look up real estate attorneys outside my immediate area. If my daughter was preparing quietly, so was I. The first attorney didn't answer. The second had a receptionist who sounded bored. The third picked up on the second ring. His name was Daniel Hargrove. His voice was steady, unhurried. He didn't interrupt when I explained that my daughter had scheduled a cognitive evaluation without my consent. "What did she do?" he asked quietly. I repeated it. "And has any physician examined you?" "No." "Have you signed anything?" "Absolutely not." A pause. Not awkward, calculated. "Mrs. Keene," he said, "before we go any further, do you feel safe in your home?" The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't understand it, because I did. "Yes," I answered after a moment, "but I don't feel secure." "That distinction matters," he said. "You need to understand something. If someone attempts to establish diminished capacity, documentation becomes their weapon. You'll want your own record, independent evaluation, and protection." Protection. The word settled into me like a key turning in a lock. We scheduled a consultation for Thursday. Not in my town, 45 minutes away. The next morning, Brent showed up alone. That had never happened before. He knocked once and let himself in before I reached the door. "You should really start locking up more," he said casually. "I do." He smiled thinly. "Just looking out for you." He walked into the living room without being invited and sat down, spreading his legs wide like he owned the space. "We need to get practical," he began. "The market's good. Interest rates are decent. It would be foolish to wait." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone." I folded my hands in my lap. I didn't realize my house was a community asset. He chuckled. "Come on, we're family." Family again. Then he leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped. "Tessa's worried," he said. "She thinks you're slipping." I held his gaze. "Is that so?" He said. "You're more forgetful, more reactive. You take things personally." "I take ownership personally," I corrected. He didn't smile this time. "You don't want this to get messy." There it was. Not a threat, not quite, but close enough.
"What would messy look like?" he asked. He hesitated. "Well, if a doctor determines you're not fully capable of managing assets, things can move quickly. Courts tend to prioritize stability for children. Children. My grandchildren had become leverage. Interesting," I said softly, "because I was under the impression courts prioritize facts." His jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding us." "No," I said evenly, "I'm understanding you perfectly." He stood up abruptly. "We're trying to help before things decline further." Decline further. He wanted that narrative planted. Instead, I stood too. "I have a medical checkup next week," I said smoothly, "with my own physician." That made him pause. "I didn't know about that," he said. "You don't know about a great many things." Silence stretched. Then he nodded once. "We'll see what the doctor says." And he left. As soon as the door closed, I exhaled slowly. They were accelerating, which meant I had to move faster. Thursday came. I drove myself to Daniel Hargrove's office in a neighboring city that smelled faintly of roasted coffee and printer toner. His office was modest, shelves of thick legal volumes, a framed photo of a golden retriever. He listened, really listened. When I finished explaining everything, the realtor, the appointment, the legally sound comment, he leaned back. "You're not confused," he said plainly. "No. You're being maneuvered." "Yes." He nodded once. "Then we counter." He outlined options with precision. Revocable trial.
We discussed possibilities, I corrected. I'm still considering mine. Her eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. I'm preventing one. For a moment, the air felt electric, charged like the second before a storm cracks open. You don't understand how serious this is, she said. I held her gaze. Oh, I understand perfectly. She left without another word. As soon as the door closed, I locked it. Then I walked upstairs and opened the closet in the master bedroom. I took out one suitcase, just one. I placed it on the bed and unzipped it slowly. I wasn't packing yet. I was measuring, and this time it was my turn. The dinner was her idea. "Let's just sit down and talk like a family," Tessa had said over the phone, her tone carefully neutral. No pressure, no paperwork. No paperwork. That was almost amusing. She insisted on hosting this time. Brent's idea, I suspect. Neutral ground, control the environment. When I walked into their house that Friday evening, the table was already set. Linen napkins, polished cutlery, candles burning low. The children were unusually quiet. Lily hugged me, but even she seemed to sense something rehearsed in the air. Brent poured wine before I even sat down. "We're glad you came," he said. I smiled politely. I was invited. Dinner began with harmless topics: school updates, soccer practice, a neighbor's new pergola. Tessa kept refilling my glass. Too attentive, too measured. Halfway through the meal, Brent cleared his throat. "Let's just put everything on the table," he said. There it was. Tessa reached beside her chair and lifted a slim folder onto the dining table. She slid it across the polished wood toward me. The candles flickered as it moved. "Mom," she said gently, "this is just a draft, nothing binding." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. "An agreement," Brant answered. "A transition plan. It protects everyone." Protects. "Open it," Tessa urged softly. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the folder and opened it slowly. Inside were neatly typed pages, legal language, ownership transfer structure, conditional residency clauses. Conditional. My right to live in my own home? Conditional? I felt the children's eyes flicking between us. They didn't understand the vocabulary, but they understood tension. "You brought this to dinner," I said calmly. "We didn't want it to feel confrontational," Tessa replied.
You don't neutralize confrontation with paperwork. You said no paperwork, I reminded her. This isn't pressure, Brent insisted. It's planning. I turned a page deliberately. There it was, a line referencing capacity affirmation, a clause allowing financial oversight in the event of decline. Decline again. I closed the folder gently. No, I said. The word landed heavier than I expected. Tessa blinked. No what? No to this? No to any version of this? Her composure cracked. You didn't even consider it. I considered it before I walked in. Brent leaned forward. You're being unreasonable. Am I? Tessa's voice sharpened. We are trying to build stability for our children. And dismantling mine, I replied evenly. Silence swallowed the table. The children stopped eating. Tessa's face flushed. You're twisting this. No, I said quietly. You are accelerating something that does not belong to you. Brent's jaw tightened. If you refuse to plan responsibly, we may have to pursue other routes. There it was, not implied, spoken. Other routes? I repeated. Tessa swallowed. If a professional evaluation shows you're not managing things properly, we would be obligated to step in. Obligated. The performance had ended. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. You scheduled an evaluation without my consent, I said steadily. You involved a realtor without my permission. You drafted a transfer agreement without my agreement. And now you're threatening to question my capacity at my own granddaughter's dinner table. The room felt smaller, tighter. Brent stood slightly. Lower your voice. I hadn't raised it. I am 66 years old, I continued calmly. I manage my affairs. I pay my taxes. I drive myself. I am not confused. Tessa's eyes glistened, not with guilt, but with frustration. You don't see it, she said. You're not thinking clearly. I stood up. I see everything, I replied. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor as I pushed it back. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Brent said. No, I answered, looking directly at him. You are. I picked up my coat. No shouting, no theatrics, just finality. As I walked toward the door, Tessa's voice followed me. If you don't cooperate, we will have no choice. I paused at the threshold. You already made your choice. Then I left. The mask slipped at dinner. They weren't asking, they were positioning. If you were Martha, would you sign or walk away? Be honest. Write your answer in the comments. The retaliation didn't come in the form of shouting. It came in the form of absence. On Monday morning, I drove to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. The pharmacist frowned at her screen. It shows this prescription was transferred. Transferred where? She typed again. Cancelled, actually, at the request of a family contact. My spine straightened. I did not authorize that. She blinked, feigning confusion. It says your daughter called. Of course she did. I kept my voice steady. Reinstated immediately and put a note in the file. No one makes changes without my direct approval. The pharmacist nodded quickly. As I walked back to my car, I felt the pieces aligning. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. Quiet disruptions designed to create dependence. Later that afternoon, my mail was missing. Not all of it, just the envelope from my bank. I checked the porch twice. The mailbox latch was closed. When Tessa stopped by that evening, smiling again like nothing had happened, I asked her directly, "Did you access my mail?" Her expression didn't flicker. "Why would I do that?" she said. "My prescription was canceled this morning." She blinked, feigning confusion. "That must be a mistake. And my bank statement? I haven't seen anything." Brent stepped in from behind her. "You're getting suspicious about everything." "Suspicious?" Yes, because patterns exist. You're isolating me, I said evenly. Tessa laughed lightly. Mom, that's dramatic. Is it? My book club had been rescheduled without my knowledge. Clara later told me Tessa called to say I wasn't feeling well. Not feeling well. A narrative was forming outside my awareness. I am not declining, I said clearly, and I am not confused. Brent folded his arms. No one said you were. You implied it. Tessa's tone sharpened. You're proving our point right now. There it was again, that circular trap. If I defended myself, I was unstable. If I stayed quiet, I was compliant. I walked past them into the hallway and opened the small cabinet. Empty. The drawer where I kept copies of insurance and tax records had been disturbed. Not completely emptied, but shifted. You've been in here, I said. No, Brent replied too quickly. I turned slowly toward him. Do not lie to me in my own house. Silence stretched. Tessa's jaw tightened. We're trying to prevent you from making reckless decisions. Reckless? You mean independent ones? I corrected. Brent exhaled sharply. You don't understand the legal consequences if you act irrationally. I held his gaze. Try me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If a doctor documents cognitive instability, we can petition for temporary conservatorship. The word landed like a hammer. Conservatorship. So that was the escalation. You've already spoken to someone. Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. The air in the hallway felt suffocating, not because I was afraid, but because the strategy had moved from suggestion to execution. You should be grateful we're handling this privately, Tessa said. Grateful? I stared at her. You're building a case against me, I said calmly. Medication interference? Appointment scheduling? Mail interference? Statements to friends? You sound paranoid, she snapped. No, I replied quietly. I sound aware.
He didn't dramatize anything. He simply pointed to the line where I needed to sign. Deed transfer, settlement statement, title confirmation, paper after paper. With every stroke of my pen, something inside my chest loosened, untangling quietly, like a knot finally giving way. At 10:12 a.m., the house was no longer mine. At 10:14, the funds were wired. At 10:16, their leverage disappeared. Would you like a moment? Daniel asked gently. I shook my head. No, I said. I'd like efficiency. He gave a small nod. Everything had already been arranged. Temporary housing 2 states away. A modest 1-bedroom apartment in a desert town where the sky was larger than the buildings. Quiet, anonymous, paid in full for a year. By noon, I returned to the house. Technically, it wasn't mine anymore, but it was still empty. The buyers had agreed to give me 48 hours before possession, professional courtesy. They were planning renovations before moving in. I walked through every room slowly, not to mourn, to inventory memory. The hallway still held a faint scent of cedar. A tiny chip remained in the kitchen tile near the stove. The upstairs bedroom window still stuck when humidity rose. I touched nothing twice. The suitcase waited by the door now, full and zipped. I left the couch, the dining table where Brent once spread his documents, the hallway Tessa had measured. I kept only what could fit into the trunk of my car. At 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Tessa. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. We filed, she said immediately. No greeting. Preliminary petition. The court date will be scheduled soon. I see, I replied calmly. You forced this. No, I said quietly. You did. Silence. You need to come by tonight, she continued. We have to review financial exposure. Financial exposure? I repeated. That won't be necessary. What do you mean? I spoke evenly. There is no property to evaluate. A pause. What are you talking about? I sold the house this morning. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief, it was impact. You did what? Her voice cracked sharply. It's no longer an asset, I said. It can't be transferred, it can't be contested. You can't just... She stopped herself. You're not legally stable enough to make that decision. I was stable enough to sign. Brent's voice cut through in the background. Put it on speaker. Then louder. This will be challenged. On what grounds? I asked calmly. You have no medical determination, no injunction, no conservatorship order. You filed too late. Chaos rippled on the other end of the line. You did this to spite us, Tessa accused. No, I replied quietly. I did this to protect myself. You've destroyed our future, she shouted. No, I corrected gently. I've secured mine. Brent's tone hardened. Where are you? Out. Out where exactly? I ended the call. Not abruptly, just decisively. At 5 p.m., I walked through the house one last time. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation. In the hallway, I paused briefly, not from doubt, but from awareness. This chapter wasn't ending with a scream. It was ending with a signature. I locked the door from the outside and slipped the key through the mailbox slot as instructed. Then I got into my car. 2 states away waited silence, and for the first time in months, it felt like freedom. I crossed the state line just after midnight. There's something strangely intimate about driving alone through darkness with everything you own packed behind you. The highway stretched endlessly, illuminated only by headlights and the occasional green exit sign promising towns I'd never heard of. I didn't cry, I didn't second guess. I drove. By dawn, the landscape had changed. Dense trees faded into dry hills, then into wide stretches of desert dotted with stubborn shrubs and cacti. The sky here felt enormous, almost theatrical in its openness. Nothing crowded it, nothing leaned in. The apartment complex was modest, beige stucco, a small gravel courtyard instead of grass. No one here knew my name. No one had memories of my hallway or opinions about my capacity. I signed the lease under Martha E. Keene, not mom, not homeowner, just Martha. The manager handed me the keys with a polite smile. "Welcome," she said. Welcome. The word felt clean. The apartment itself was simple. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a narrow balcony overlooking the parking lot, and beyond it a vast horizon of pale sand and distant mountains. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. I placed my suitcase on the floor and stood still. Silence. No footsteps overhead, no doors opening suddenly, no whispered conversations about me in the next room. Just quiet. I unpacked slowly. The jade teapot went onto the kitchen shelf, my husband's watch into the nightstand drawer, the tin of buttons on the dresser. I hung 5 blouses in the closet. 5. That was enough. Around noon, my phone vibrated again. Tessa. I answered. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Safe," I replied. "You think this is funny?" "I don't find it amusing." "You blindsided us. The buyers changed the locks." "It's no longer my house." "You filed your petition too late," I said calmly. "You manipulated the timing." "No," I corrected. "I understood it." Brent's voice rose behind her. "Tell her we're contesting." "We're contesting the sale," Tessa said sharply. "You were under stress." I stepped onto the balcony and looked out at the enormous sky. "Stress does not equal incapacity," I replied. "You ran away." "No," I said. "I relocated." There was a long pause. "Where are you staying?" she pressed. "That's not information you need." "We're your family." Family. The word no longer carried weight. "I attempted to remove my autonomy," I said quietly. "You canceled my medication. You scheduled medical evaluations without my consent. That's not protection." Her breathing grew heavier.
You've destroyed trust. Trust requires good faith, I replied. You just didn't anticipate my strategy. Then her voice turned cold. You won't see the kids like this. There it was, the final lever. I leaned against the balcony railing. Visitation isn't dependent on property ownership, I said calmly. If you weaponize the children, that will be documented. You're threatening us? No, I'm establishing boundaries. I'm not hiding, I added. I looked toward the mountains. I'm beginning. And I ended the call. 4 days later, they found me. When I opened my door and saw Tessa standing in the courtyard, Brent behind her, I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. You really thought we wouldn't find you, she said. I hoped you'd respect the distance. They stepped inside without waiting. Old habits. Tessa looked around the apartment. You downgraded your entire life just to spite us. No, I replied. I simplified it. Brent crossed his arms. You made a legally questionable decision. You filed after the sale, I reminded him. We can argue undue influence. From whom? Silence. Finally, Brent placed a document on the counter. We withdrew the petition. That made me pause. You what? There's no asset left to protect. Tessa whispered. You didn't have to go nuclear. Nuclear? I said softly. Interesting word for self-defense. You scheduled medical evaluations without consent. You prepared conservatorship paperwork. We were scared, she snapped. Of what? She hesitated. Of losing control, I said quietly. The words hung heavily in the room. Brent looked away first. Finally, he asked, What now? I answered calmly. Now you go home. Tessa stared at me. You're really choosing this. I'm choosing myself. They left. No slammed doors, just silence again. I stood alone in my small apartment beneath the enormous desert sky. No petition, no court date, no leverage, just consequence. They came thinking they still had power, but the paperwork had already been signed. Standing there, what would you feel? Relief or regret? Tell me below. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, not from anxiety, but from habit. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. No rehearsed arguments, no tension waiting for me downstairs. Just quiet. I brewed coffee and stepped onto the narrow balcony. The desert air was cool at that hour, almost gentle. The mountains in the distance looked like folded paper beneath a pale sky. My phone showed no missed calls, no threats, no demands. That was new. I spent the morning unpacking the last few things I had brought with me. There wasn't much left now. A small suitcase of clothes, a box of books, and a framed photo of Tessa when she was 8 years old, standing awkwardly in a crooked ballet costume. I hesitated before placing it on the shelf. For a moment, I considered sliding it back into the suitcase. Instead, I set it upright. Memory doesn't disappear just because power shifts. Around noon, Daniel called. They've formally withdrawn the petition, he said. No pending actions? None. And the sale? I asked. Legally solid, he replied. They would have had no standing. You acted before any capacity motion was granted. Timing. Everything had come down to timing. Thank you, I told him. You didn't need saving, he said calmly. You needed strategy. After we hung up, I walked to the small community bulletin board near the leasing office. Flyers overlapped one another in uneven layers. Yoga classes, book swaps, a notice for a local bookstore hiring part-time help. The bookstore caught my eye. It wasn't glamorous, it certainly wasn't lucrative, but it felt peaceful. I called the number. By 3 that afternoon, I was standing inside a narrow shop that smelled of old paper and dust. The owner, a woman in her early 70s named Laya, peered at me over her glasses.
Experience? She asked. I've lived long enough to recommend good stories, I replied. She smiled. You available mornings? Yes. She nodded once. Start Monday. Just like that. No evaluation, no documentation, no one questioning my stability. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Tessa. I considered ignoring the call. Instead, I answered. Her voice sounded different, not soft, not warm, but not sharp either. The petition is withdrawn, she said. I know. Silence followed. We overreacted, she added. That word was insufficient, but it was something. You escalated, I corrected. Another pause. We thought you were slipping, she admitted. And if I had been? I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. Then we would have needed to step in, she said finally. Step in, I repeated, or step over. The silence that followed carried more honesty than any previous argument. You didn't think I'd go this far, she said. You didn't think I could? I replied. There was no shouting now, no ultimatums, just distance. Are you okay? She asked, almost reluctantly. Yes. Where are you working? That's not relevant, I said gently. She exhaled. You've changed. No, I replied. I stopped accommodating. Another silence. You're still their grandmother, she said at last. I know. The call ended without resolution. No reconciliation, no dramatic apology, just acknowledgement. That night, I stood again on the balcony as the sun dissolved into red and gold across the horizon. The desert cooled quickly once darkness settled. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't celebrate. It simply exists. My apartment was smaller. I owned fewer things. There were no stairs to climb anymore. But I had something I had nearly lost: authority over my own life. And at 66, that isn't a downgrade, it's a reclamation. Work began Monday morning at 9. The bookstore was even narrower than it first appeared. Shelves stretched almost to the ceiling, with old wooden ladders on wheels tucked into the corners. Above the door hung a small painted sign, Second Chapter Books. I liked that. Second Chapter. Laya handed me a simple apron and pointed toward the register. People don't just buy books, they confess things while holding them. She wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, I had already heard about a divorce, a retirement party, and a grandson who refused to visit his grandmother because she asked too many questions. I smiled at that last one. Questions are how we stay present, I told the woman gently. She nodded thoughtfully. The rhythm of the store settled into me quickly, alphabetizing, dusting spines, recommending novels based on descriptions like something strong but not depressing. I moved easily, steadily. No one questioned my balance when I climbed the ladder. No one watched for confusion in my eyes. At lunch, I sat in the tiny back room with a container of lentil stew I'd made the night before. Same recipe as always. Thyme, bay leaf. The scent grounded me. Familiar, but no longer tied to a contested kitchen. My phone buzzed once. A photo. Tessa had sent it without caption. The grandchildren stood in front of what used to be my house. The new owners had repainted the door. Blue now, not red. I studied the image carefully. There was no accusation, no guilt hidden in words. Just the photograph. I typed a single sentence back. They look healthy. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. They miss you. I didn't respond immediately. Missing someone isn't the same as respecting them. That evening, after closing the shop, I walked through the town square. It was small and quiet. A diner with flickering neon, a hardware store that smelled like sawdust and oil. People nodded as they passed. No one knew my history. Anonymity is a form of relief. Later, in my apartment, I opened the small metal tin of buttons and spread them across the table. Different colors, different decades. My mother used to keep them in case something tears. It occurred to me that not everything torn needs to be mended. Sometimes you cut the fabric differently. The following Saturday, the children called me directly, not Tessa. Lily's voice came first. "Grandma, why did you move so far?" I inhaled slowly. Honesty matters, but so does proportion. "I wanted a new adventure," I said. "Did Mom make you?" she asked quietly. Children see more than adults admit. "No," I replied gently. "Grandma makes her own choices." There was a pause. Then Ethan chimed in. "Mom says you're stubborn." I smiled faintly. "Sometimes stubborn means strong." They laughed. The sound carried through the phone like something unbroken. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. I did not regret selling the house. I did not regret leaving, but I understood something clearly now. Freedom creates space. Space creates distance, and distance reveals truth. 3 weeks into my new life, I received a handwritten letter, not from Tessa, from Brent. It was short and direct. "We miscalculated. That's on us. You moved faster than we anticipated. I hope we can reset at some point." No apology, but acknowledgement matters. I folded the letter once and placed it inside the tin of buttons, not as forgiveness, as record. That night, I stood again on the balcony watching the horizon swallow the sun. The sky turned violent shades of orange and violet before surrendering to darkness. I had not been rescued. I had not been exiled. I had acted. At 66, I refused to be repositioned, and in doing so, I changed the trajectory of every conversation that would follow. No one would measure my hallway again. No one would schedule my decline. The house was gone, but I remained. And that was enough. 4 months have passed since the morning I locked a door that no longer belonged to me and drove toward a sky that asked no questions. Life here isn't dramatic, it unfolds quietly. I open the bookstore at 9. I recommend hopeful novels to retirees who want something meaningful but not naive. I alphabetize biographies, and I drink 2 strong coffees from a chipped ceramic mug that says, "Still here." That phrase means more to me now than it ever did inside a 4-bedroom house. Tessa and I speak occasionally, carefully. There are no more threats, no more references to doctors or petitions. The house exists between us like fragile glass, acknowledged, untouched. 2 weeks ago, she asked if I would visit for Lily's recital. "I'll think about it," I said. That used to be her line. I did go. I stayed in a hotel. When I drove past what used to be my house, I didn't slow down. The door is still blue. There's a swing set in the yard now. Different curtains in the windows. Someone else's life. I felt no regret, just recognition. After the recital, Tessa and I stood in the parking lot while the children ran ahead. "You look well," she said. "I am." She nodded. "I didn't expect you to actually leave." "I know." She hesitated. "I thought you'd